Having focused so much on Russian history, I've grown a deep fascination with the advent of Orthodox Christianity's theological divergence with Western Catholicism. This is of course due to Russia being primarily Orthodox, but more so due to me taking intense interest in theology during my university days. This is part 1 in a collaboration series with Quill Ink History, in which we analyze the deep-rooted causes and unfolding of what will become known as the Great Schism of 1054. After this video, I encourage you to watch part 2 of the series on Quill Ink's channel, so you can get a flavor of the immediate events of the schism and its aftermath. In this video, we will be focusing on the divergence of theology, political power, and culture that allowed the Great Schism to unfold in the first place. During much of the Roman Empire's early existence, Christianity was seen as a marginalized and persecuted religion, with countless cases of martyrdom. Perpetua of Carthage, St. Paul the Apostle, and the crucifixion of St. Peter, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. It was not until the conversion of Emperor Constantine I that the legality of Christianity within the Roman Empire was determined with the Edict of Milan in 313. Yet theology was another matter entirely, which was tackled in the Council of Nicaea, taking place during the summer of 325. Being invoked by the emperor, what is now known as the First Ecumenical Council dealt with theological matters like calculating the date of Easter, the wording of the Creed, which stated basic Christian belief, and most importantly, the doctrines of a man named Arius. To understand Arius, we need to understand the concept of the Trinity, which is quite complex in that it outlines the relationships between different persons or hypostases that make up God: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Father is basically the image we have of the Old Testament God, towering over us mortals. The Son is basically the manifestation of God in the material world, Jesus Christ. And the Holy Spirit is essentially the godly person that permeates us in order to live as devout believers. It may seem pedantic, but carefully outlining the relationships between each of these persons was important, as concerns could arise regarding polytheism and the legitimacy of Jesus, which could cause problems. Now, the reason Arius is so important in all of this is because he proposed that the Son of God was a creature made by God from nothing a finite time ago. What Arius is saying is that Jesus isn't of the same divine nature as God. This caused backlash, in which his writings were condemned not once, but twice, with the Second Ecumenical Council at Constantinople in 381. But the damage was done. Many Germanic tribes, like the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, and Vandals that had invaded the Western Roman Empire, actually supported Arius' doctrine and spread it fervently throughout Western Europe and North Africa. And although this was eventually checked by the Byzantine reconquests of former imperial lands, it created the first sign of a divergence between East and West. It also did not help that few Western bishops attended the subsequent ecumenical councils, which were all held in the East. Their discussions were conducted in Greek, and often the Bishop of Rome was the sole Western representative. This funneled religious authority through Rome in the highly decentralized West, whilst it created a dynamic and close-knit relationship between the now Byzantine Emperor and Patriarch of Constantinople, which often extended its beliefs to territories within or adjacent to the Byzantine Empire. We must understand that Constantine's decision to summon the First Ecumenical Council set a precedent in which later Roman emperors would follow suit, and this didn't create problems with Rome, as the city was under Byzantine control from the 6th to the 8th century. At least nominally. Concurrent to Rome's growing independence, the last universally accepted ecumenical council was held in 787. The authority to even summon such councils came from the fact that the Byzantines still viewed themselves as Romans, and not merely as successors to the empire. Such thinking also extended to theology, which was mainly recorded in Greek, therefore impeding the West's ability to partake in debate and discussion pertaining to the Trinity. For example, in 6th century Spain, the wording of the Creed was changed from "The Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father through the Son" to the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and from the Son. Basically, that the Holy Spirit, or the person that spiritually permeates us believers, essentially originates from God the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ. The Byzantines only thought of the Holy Spirit as originating from God the Father, since accepting Jesus' role in the generative process would undermine the doctrine that the Father was the source of Trinitarian persons and the personality of the Holy Spirit. Thus, God the Father would be deemed a theological failure. This Spanish edition was to be known as the Filioque Clause and rapidly spread through Western Europe until it was adopted by Rome in the 11th century. It also didn't help that the stories of early saints were mainly recorded in Greek. Thus, the lack of communication between the Greek-speaking East and Latin-speaking West spurred the intellectual creativity necessary to give rise to such stark theological differences. Paul Collins even goes on to say that the Christian understanding of reality was accepted as basic, and notions of religious pluralism were inconceivable. Therefore, disagreement would fuel isolationism between churches. One such disagreement was the veneration of saints and idols, which was seen as a deep concern for Byzantine Emperor Leo III, who tied it to bad omens, such as the successful Arabic raids in Asia Minor and a massive volcanic eruption near the island of Santorini in 726. The situation essentially created a competition for religious legitimacy with the Muslim Arabs, who also forbade idolatry. The resulting ban on icons in 730 produced a sharp division with Rome, as noted in the hostility of Popes Gregory II and Gregory III. As Rome was still under Byzantine control, the Byzantines were also able to transfer the ecclesiastical diocese of East Illyricum to Constantinople's control, which did not sit well with the Latin Church, as they would lose a substantial amount of revenue. What was known as iconoclasm, or the forbidding of the veneration of saints, idols, and icons, continued under Leo's son, Constantine V, who organized a council at Hieria in 754, although Rome did not participate. It should also be noted that it was during this time when Rome gained its independence from Byzantium. More on that later. It was only when Empress Irene, the widow of Constantine's son, Leo IV, called an ecumenical council on behalf of her son, Constantine VI, and reversed iconoclasm. This would be the seventh and final universally accepted ecumenical council at Nicaea. Even then, Irene saw her son gaining more power day by day, and thus she had him blinded in the same purple chamber where she had given birth to him 26 years earlier. Rome was not pleased with the situation. A woman in charge of Byzantium? So in typical medieval fashion, it crowned Charlemagne, the king of the Franks, instead, calling him the Emperor of the Romans. Iconoclasm in the Byzantine Empire would further be reimposed by Emperors Leo V, Michael II, and Theophilos. But yet again, another imperial widow, Theodora, would reverse this decision for a second and final time. She was able to secure her husband, Theophilos, a posthumous pardon for his heresy, which is why even today he is still not chanted as being heretical in Orthodox churches on the first Sunday in Lent. Talk about true love. But even then, this shows the intense internal divisions regarding the issue in Byzantium, and of course the deteriorating politics with Rome, signaling what was to come centuries later. Let us venture away from theology and backtrack to the political development of the crisis. As had been mentioned, the Second Ecumenical Council of 381 condemned Arianism and whatnot, but it also did something else. The Roman Emperor Theodosius I insisted on the promotion of the sees of Constantinople and Jerusalem to the same patriarchal status as Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, all three of which had been founded by apostles. So the legitimacy of Constantinople really rested on the fact that it was the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the last remaining bastion of the Imperium Romanum, whilst a much weaker Rome stressed its religious and moral authority, known as the doctrine of papal primacy. This is why Rome had to accept the decision in the Fourth Ecumenical Council at Chalcedon in 451. When Byzantium reconquered Rome in the 6th century, it established a military class, or armed ordo, and from this class rose the numerous clans and factions that wrestled for secular control of the city centuries later. This clan class was generally pro-Byzantine and caused a lot of problems for later popes, such as with the cadaver synod of Pope Formosus, in which the decaying body of the 81-year-old was exhumed and tried for heresy. Yuck. However, secular Roman leaders like Alberico II, son of Alberico I of Spoleto and Camerino, emulated the way in which the Byzantine government was linked with the church, formulating a bureaucratic-style government in which the papacy became a department of state. Rome thus became further and further detached from the Byzantine sphere of influence, having mingled in Western European affairs and by using kingdoms as political leverage, like how Charlemagne deposed Desiderius of Lombardy at the request of Pope Hadrian I in the 8th century. Just as Italian stability began to falter, Hadrian resumed the pleas of both Pope Stephen II and Paul I for Frankish intervention in troubled peninsular affairs. Even then, the political situation also spilled into the east, with Rome and Constantinople fighting over control of the newly converted Bulgars in the Balkans, who eventually grew restless and simply created their own autocephalous and independent church. At least Formosus got on very well with King Boris as opposed to his own church. Yikes. But Rome also did a bit of hosting, if you know what I mean, as it became custom for disaffected Eastern clerics or monks who had been condemned by the emperor or patriarch to appeal to Rome. Just look when Byzantine Emperor Leo VI was excommunicated by his own patriarch and looked to, you guessed it, Rome. And of course, who could forget the Normans who invaded southern Italy, booted the Byzantines out, and then showed their sympathies to the Latin Church? Or the Arabs who conquered Syria, Egypt, Palestine, and North Africa in the 7th century? It didn't help that during much of the early medieval period, the Byzantine Empire simply had a defensive posture that limited the possibility of religious power projection. Long story short, there's just too much to say about the political context, so let us now venture away from politics to culture. Now, contrary to popular belief, Rome didn't actually require celibacy in the priesthood, deaconate, and minor orders, which resembled the Eastern system in which only bishops were required to be celibate. However, celibacy grew in popularity until it finally became the norm in the 12th century. This was paired with the Western belief of shaving one's facial hair, whereas this was a big no-no for the Eastern Church. This is why the modern-day Orthodox Church still has married priests with huge bushy beards, whereas the Catholic Church does not. Rome also loved to use unleavened bread in communion, citing that Jesus Christ did it in the Last Supper, whereas the Eastern Church disagreed. Leavened bread was the way to go. I wonder if these traditions still persist. Aha! But an often overlooked reason for such negative Western opinion of Byzantium came from the ambassador of Otto I, the Great, Liutprand of Cremona. A cynic, diplomat, and stylist in the words of Mr. Collins, Liutprand was to arrange a Byzantine bride for Emperor Otto's son. However, East-West relations weren't exactly amicable. Although he had visited Constantinople before and loved it, the backdrop of his second visit rested on peace negotiations between the Holy Roman Empire and Byzantium. Holy? Roman? The regal title of Otto made the Byzantines uneasy, so much so that in 967 the Byzantines grew even more hostile to Otto, since he had reasserted Charlemagne's claims to overlordship of Rome and Byzantine-controlled southern Italy. This threatened to break up the Roman clans that were so pro-Byzantine, so of course Liutprand would be unwelcome and unwanted. Thus, the sky was gray over Constantinople when Liutprand arrived, and he was denied entry, at least momentarily, And well, the rest, as they say, is history. Scribble, 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 and one pissed off diplomat shapes Western public opinion of the East. So the context that set the tone for the Great Schism of 1054 was the gradual dysfunction of the ecumenical councils through items like the filioque, the increased political leverage Rome had in the decentralized West as opposed to the centralized East, the fact that Byzantium lost nominal control of Rome in the 8th century, the fact that the See of Rome was technically founded by an apostle whilst Constantinople wasn't, the Arab conquests of the 7th century, too, and the Arian controversy. Greek versus Latin, religious monism, celibacy, bread for communion, priests being able to grow beards, iconoclasm, index pensions, tax exempt. Whoa, wrong video. But of course, we can't forget Liutprand of Cremona. Our odyssey into the context of the Great Schism of 1054 is done. However, I encourage you to watch part 2 of the series in order to see how the actual events and aftermath of the schism unfolded. Thank you again to all my patrons for your support, and see you next time.